And then also a written workflow will be shared with everyone as well, using the Activation Working Group Slack channel. Yeah, so welcome everyone. I'm hoping to use 30 minutes or less to talk about the importance of the OpenStreetMap Foundation's organized editing guidelines in disaster response. But I think this is also applicable generally to coordinated mapping activities using Tasking Manager. So we've got some people on the call here who aren't necessarily planning disaster response activities, but are involved in putting together longer term mapping campaigns. And so this is going to be relevant to you as well. Going to be using the time we have together here to describe what the organized editing guidelines are exactly. And then we're going to be talking through how those guidelines apply in a disaster context. And then finally, going to be sharing the importance of community contact, of documenting things, and of tracking contributions to disaster responses in general. So not just because it's important to do those things because they're in the organized editing guidelines, but because they are super important to do. I'm going to be sharing that. This, as usual, involves me running through some slides, but also then doing some live demos. So probably half and half, but if there's time at the end as well, we can use that for questions. So what are the organized editing guidelines, or OEGs? So it's actually a 4-page document released by the OpenStreetMap Foundation back in 2018. It's available at this link, which I'll share in the chat. You don't need to actually download the document. It's available to read on that webpage. Here it is. There's a GIF showing it. It's quite short, actually. There's not much text in there. It sounds like it's going to be a big document, but it's not very big. It's a very, very sensible set of recommendations that the OpenStreetMap Foundation has made. And it applies for any coordinated editing activities of OpenStreetMap. So that really applies to any activity on Tasking Manager, because that is coordinated activity to improve OpenStreetMap. They are guidelines, the organized editing guidelines. They are really guidelines. So they're not policy. They're not kind of legally binding. And as stated in the guidelines, a best effort approach is expected and enough. Okay. So sometimes you might not be able to achieve everything that's laid out in the guidelines, but if you try your best, that will be very well received. Now, what's most relevant from these guidelines in a disaster context? And I would say also in a kind of planning a tasking manager or remote mapping activity context. In a disaster context, it specifically says in the guidelines that you should try and inform the community of your plans, of your mapping plans, before mapping starts as soon as is practical. So that means that if you're an open mapping hub and you're planning to create a project in Mozambique, for example, reach out to the OpenStreetMap Mozambique community and let them know that those are your plans as soon as is practical. Now, actually, it has a specific mention of a disaster context in the organized editing guidelines, because in a non-disaster context, so if you're planning mapping activities and they're not in response to disaster, the recommendation in the organized editing guidelines is that you reach out to the community to tell them of your mapping plans no less than 2 weeks before the mapping activity starts. Okay. Now that 2 week, that kind of 2 week deadline, that 2 week objective is not practical in a disaster response. If you're waiting 2 weeks after a disaster response for community input, the disaster response is likely going to be over before the mapping starts. So that line in there with the organized editing guidelines does mean that the community contact needs to be started as soon as possible, but you don't need to wait for 2 weeks of consultation, 2 weeks of back and forth to start the mapping for responding in a disaster. Another really important piece in the organized editing guidelines is a recommendation to add dedicated documentation on the OpenStreetMap wiki. And that really means setting up an wiki page. And I'll show you in a quick demo how easy that is. And it's better to have a wiki page with very little information than none at all. So you can start with the bare basics and build it up slowly. It also includes a recommendation to establish a unique hashtag before mapping starts. If you have a unique hashtag or tracking tag, that will mean that all contributions that are made through your campaign or response to disaster will be tracked from the get-go, which means you can answer who's been mapping, how much have they been mapping, where have they been mapping, when do they start mapping, when do they stop mapping. You can't answer any of those questions unless you've got a unique tracking tag associated with your response or with your campaign. On the right is a kind of timeline of these key activities. So in a disaster context, a disaster strikes, first thing that happens. Try, as soon as you kind of have a plan, a basic plan of where to map and maybe when you might start mapping, contact the local community and share your plans with that community for input as fast as possible. And I'm also going to do a kind of demo of what that can look like. Simultaneously, while you're doing that, try and start an OpenStreetMap wiki page to document things. Now, if you have that, while you're communicating with the local community, it actually acts as a really good communication piece about what you're up to, about what your plans are. It's sometimes not possible to write a wiki immediately before you start contacting the community. So it's not a prerequisite to have a wiki set up, a wiki page set up before you contact the community. In fact, it's probably better to prioritize contacting the community before sinking a bunch of time into writing up a wiki. But try and do these things simultaneously because they do support each other. Establish your unique tracking tag, and I'll show you how to do that in a few moments as well. And once you've done that, and once you're happy with where your documentation is at, once your community contact is strong, start the mapping process. So publish a project if it's on Tasking Manager. What's the point, right? Should we just skip the organized editing guidelines? They're a bit of a faff, right? They take time. They're taking extra effort. What's the point in doing them? Well, I'd argue that by not doing what the organized editing guidelines recommend, you risk duplicating efforts. Let's say there's a scenario, which let's go back to that scenario. You're going to map it's the OpenStreetMap Open Mapping Hub in Eastern Southern Africa. The plans to map in Mozambique. It doesn't contact the OpenStreetMap community in Mozambique before creating a project there. Organized editing starts happening in Mozambique without the OpenStreetMap community in Mozambique being aware. And actually, separately, the OpenStreetMap Mozambique community creates another project that overlaps the project which the Eastern Southern African Open Mapping Hub has created. So duplication is happening. If there are overlapping projects in Tasking Manager, there would be conflicts and duplication of effort would happen. So if you have community contact early on, it avoids that kind of duplication. If you don't assign a tracking tag to your efforts, you'll have absolutely no idea how many people contributed to your response, how many features were mapped, how many buildings or roads were mapped, where that mapping took place, when the mapping took place, when it started, when it stopped. You'll have no idea how to answer those questions if they come up later. Yeah. So having a unique tracking tag will be really important for being able to actually gain those insights. If you're not communicating with the local community before you start mapping there, you really risk imposing mapping efforts on that country, on that community, on that locality, without the buy-in of the local OpenStreetMap community. Okay, it's not a good situation to be in. In the organized editing guidelines, it says that if you don't follow the guidelines, if you're really contravening them and it's causing issues, you do risk contributions being made through your projects being reverted by the OpenStreetMap Foundation Data Working Group. And this does happen. If they spot contributions that are being made and they're being made in a very disorganized fashion and not with local community buy-in and with zero consensus on the approach, they will make reversions on those edits, which means they will mass undo those contributions to OpenStreetMap. And it even says that in cases of severe or repeated problems with contravening the organized editing guidelines, individuals and organizations may be banned from editing. So it's an extreme scenario. But let's say you're contravening the guidelines massively, that may happen. And it's in your own interest to follow these guidelines. I can say from experience, if you put more time up front into, for example, writing wikis, contacting the community to hear what their priorities are, and getting their buy-in, getting more people to map from the community, it's going to save you time and effort in the long run. You're going to get far fewer questions from the wider community later on if you address those important things as early as possible. It's going to save you time. This image is just showing you the fork in the road, right? Don't follow the organized editing guidelines, go down a dark and scary path. Follow them, go down a light and enlightened path, right? Okay. Now into demos, right? I think I'm going to do 3 demos. I'm going to do community contact. And these demos are kind of in order, maybe. And I'm going to have this as a kind of scenario. Contacting the community, creating a wiki page from scratch, and establishing a unique hashtag. And there's some FAQs at the end of this document here, so I'm going to share a link to these slides. If we have time near the end, I'll share those, but I'm imagining these demos are going to take a couple minutes. So first demo, community contact. There is not a blueprint for doing this. What I'm going to be showing here isn't the only way to contact the community. And this very much depends on who you are as the project creator, as the planner of a response. If you are the community, let's say you are OpenStreetMap Mozambique, you're a member of OpenStreetMap Mozambique, and you are creating projects. In a sense, the community contact with the local community is already done because you are the local community. You are the one doing the project creation. You are the one knowing where the priorities are, and you don't really have a community's contact. I would say it would be worth considering contacting people that are as local as possible to where you are responding. So if you have community members that are more local to the area that's being mapped, good to contact them within your community. But if you're an organization or a hub, for example, that isn't, in a sense, an OpenStreetMap geographical community, then you are responsible for contacting that community before you start mapping. Again, how might that look? Let's take the scenario of Cyclone Jude, which has hit Mozambique as recently as last week, 2 weeks ago. Recent disaster. One of the first places to go is the community.openstreetmap.org forum. Right? I'm going to drop a link to that page. There are the kind of general talk pages on this forum, and this is where you could post, and this is going to get the most visibility. So you could post about plans to respond in a particular region because of a disaster, and this is going to get a lot of views, and it's going to get exposed to a lot of people. You do need to sign into this website, into this forum, in order to post. It can link to your OpenStreetMap account, so it's a super quick sign up. Within this forum, it's also broken into separate regions, right? If you go into all categories here, you can see communities split geographically. So check if the country that you plan to do organized editing in is listed here. For example, Nepal is here, Indonesia's here, India's here, lots of countries. This has really kind of superseded the old mailing lists, which were basically email mailing lists. So this is the primary thing to check, right? If you don't see the country listed here, then it might be that that country is using a different, that OpenStreetMap community and country is using a different channel to communicate. It might be using Telegram, it might be using a WhatsApp group, it might be using a dedicated other online blog page or forum page. For example, the OpenStreetMap France community has its own dedicated version of Discourse, which is the kind of underlying software that the OpenStreetMap community forum uses. So you might need to do a bit of digging around to find out what might be an appropriate channel to use. If you're at a loss, post in the disaster mapping channel in hot Slack and ask. And that's often how I found out. For example, this is how I found out about the existence of this OpenStreetMap France community that is active here. Recently, I was in touch with the OpenStreetMap Spanish community, the Spanish community, and they use Telegram to communicate. Okay, so it varies by community, and you might need to do a bit of digging around to find out. There is a really good, I'll probably find it. Yeah, Russ, you've got it right there. There's a really good clickable map, explorable map, the OpenStreetMap Community Index, which is like a big world map, and it looks like a pane of shattered glass. It's really splitting the geographic regions into different areas, and you can click on a region and it's going to show you the channels that community might be using. It shows a very long list for each community. It's because it shows first starts with the kind of localized communities it's part of, and then the more global communities it's part of. Okay. Look for existing posts about disasters. So maybe I'll try and find one. So look for existing posts about disasters to sort of be inspired, and feel free to repost the text. You don't need to write these things from scratch. For example, here's one, Nigeria floods activation, that Pete wrote last year. I'll just send a link to it if you want a kind of a blueprint to use or a template to use when you are communicating with the wider community. Okay, let's jump on to the next demo. Remind myself what it is. Creating a wiki page from scratch. Okay, how to create a wiki page from scratch. Now, a detailed walkthrough of how to create wiki pages I'm not going to do right now because we've only got 10 minutes. But the most straightforward way to create a wiki page from scratch is to find an existing wiki page, like for example, this Nigeria flood wiki page, and use it as a template. So I'll drop a link to this in the chat. Use it as a template. And as far as I'm aware, with Wiki, you can't just, there's no option, the OpenStreetMap Wiki, there's no option just to clone a page easily. You can clone pages, but it's not with one click. I'll show you how to do that shortly. What you need to do to create a new page from scratch is going to kind of maybe sound simpler than it might have seemed, is you just need to write a new URL in your address bar. Okay, and that URL needs to be preceded by the following. So I'm going to take this from the slides I was sharing. That URL needs to be preceded by, and this is in the Q&A section, it needs to be preceded by this link here, okay? wiki.openstreetmap.org, so that's like the root, which is the OpenStreetMap wiki page. Okay, and then it needs to be followed by the name of your activity. So you can do this from scratch. Now, let's pretend we're creating a page from scratch for the Jude 2025 cyclone. So let's call it Jude 25. What I'm doing there is going to be small for you, but what I'm doing there is I'm just editing the end of this URL. Okay. And let's just make sure I've got the front of it. HTTPS. I'm just editing the very end of this URL. Okay, so I'll just drop this URL into the chat so you've got them you can use. And now if I hit enter, it's going to create a new page. It's actually going to say that this page doesn't exist. Okay, as long as you're signed into the OpenStreetMap Wiki, which is very easy to do, to create an account and sign in, it's going to say that you can create this page. Now, the way to name your response, this is kind of up to you, right? It needs to be unique. So, for example, I think the Nigeria flood name was 2024_Nigeria_floods. So June 2025 might be better actually to be something like Cyclone June 25. Okay. It's up to you how to name it. You just name it something quite unique, but also that reflects the disaster response or the organized editing activities you've got. Right, it's going to say that this doesn't exist. So to create the page, you can just select create this page. It's going to take you directly to the kind of complicated editor of the OpenStreetMap Wiki, and it's blank. There's nothing in here because it's a blank new page. This is where having your other old wiki up is useful. We can now use this as a template. And we could do this by going to this old wiki page from another response. We can go into edit source, which is going to give you the source text. It's going to give you this kind of rich text, which we're going to copy over. So I'm going to go Control A, Control C to copy the lot. And I'm just going to dump it in here. Okay. What I'm doing there is just basically creating a template. And I can, over time, go through this and replace the text. I'm going to save this right now. I'm going to save this and just say created new page from template. Okay. Using Nigeria response. Right. So what I've got here is the kind of rich text, which I've just used as basically as a template. I got my comment on what I've done here, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now I've got a Cyclone Jude page, but all of the content is exact duplicate of the content from the Nigeria response. But now I've got this in here, it's easy to edit, right? If I want to start editing this, I can just select edit here, and it's going to give me the easy editor. It's much easier to use this, right? The easy editor, you can just edit like a Word document, right? So the Cyclone Jude response is being coordinated by Wilson. Right, so I'm going to dump Wilson's here and delete a couple of these bullets, right? Maybe I could say that I've been supporting him, supports I'm Colchester, and I'm going to change a bunch of stuff here. But the main thing is, this is now really easy to edit, right? If I want to remove this text, I can do that. If I want to change the start date right here, I can say that it's actually started last week, started March 13th. 2025, right? And it's TBC. Super straightforward editing, right? And if I want to delete whole sections, I can just highlight and delete. I'm going to go ahead and save. Now I've got like some of the first details into this wiki, right? It's not looking great still. It still needs the title change and so on. It still needs quite a lot of effort. But the great thing is I've got a template here. Yeah, Russ has actually shared in a template which is more like a blank template. So if you don't want sort of existing content to be inspired by, you can use that link as well, which is really good. Right. Don't feel the pressure. There's loads of sections here. Don't feel the pressure to have stuff in all of these sections. It's often better to just leave stuff blank while you're working it out and have something to share rather than just not having a wiki at all to share. So go ahead and start adding stuff. Leave sections blank if you don't have information yet. At least if you've got a wiki, you can share something, right? And stuff can be populated, not just by you, but by other people as well. Okay. Final thing I was going to give a demo on was establishing a unique hashtag. Okay. To establish a unique hashtag, it's very straightforward. what you need to do is go to this website, which is the Awesome Now stats page. And you need to search in the top left-hand corner for a hashtag, a unique tracking tag. And if it doesn't show up, it means you found a unique one, and you should use that. Now, some recommendations for choosing a hashtag, for choosing a tracking tag. When you start typing in here, you'll see anything that already exists, right? So try and create a unique one. If you're mapping in Syria in 2025, just creating a hashtag which was Syria wouldn't be specific enough, and it already exists. Let's pretend we're still responding to Jude, right? Jude in Mozambique. So maybe the hashtag we use here is cyclone. And I can see that cyclone has already been used a little bit. But if I go cyclone, Jude, okay, already that's not coming up. There's been Jude cyclones in the past, but it's not been mentioned before. And let's call it 25 for 2025. Cyclone Jude 25. That's not been found before. That's not been used. So it's unique. So we could go ahead and start using that. Okay. The way you actually implement that is when you're creating your task manager projects, you edit the project and you set in the metadata for that hashtag to populate every time that someone saves their work. Or if you're using another tool like MapRoulette, you can also edit settings and set that hashtag to be added automatically. Really important to have that from the get-go, because then it starts counting the stats as soon as people start contributing. You can't retrospectively add a tracking tag. It's at the time or never. Okay. Now that's the last demo I was going to give. We've only got a minute now for questions. Sorry. But any questions, any quick questions that we can address in a minute or so? That was just lightning one. Go on, Martin.
Yeah, I've put a remark in the chat about the hashtag.
Yeah. Yeah, so that...
There are many complaints from out of OpenStreetMap. Well, there are complaints that if you're going through the hashtags in, for instance, OSMCHA, and you have these hot hashtags, there's no way to see what is being mapped.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So at the tool, as a project creator, at the tool level, when you're setting up your projects, you can edit what is automatically populated in the change set comment field. So one thing you should definitely add is your unique hashtag. One thing we definitely recommend adding also is a short description of what people are doing in your project. If it's quite simple, let's say if people are just mapping buildings, you might as well add for what I've put in the chat there to be automatically populated. For example, if it's a Cyclone Jude project mapping buildings, you might as well just add that to the metadata field for the change set, automatically populated change set mapped some buildings. Because everyone that's going to be contributing to your project, let's say, is just mapping buildings, that's going to be correct. So would recommend doing that as well. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And that obviously doesn't need to be unique, that piece of text, and it's not used for tracking purposes, that piece of text. It's purely a descriptor of what's being done. Okay. Got to close there, I'm afraid. I'm sorry I haven't left more time for questions. Do please drop questions, follow-up questions into the Slack channel, disaster mapping Slack channel. But thanks very much for attending, everyone. I'm really pleased to see good attendance for the session, which is, you know, on paper much less engaging than, you know, learning how to use satellite imagery. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Speak soon.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.